I'm Rolf Borelius with Shooter's Paradise. This video is about church security, particularly the administration of a church security team. Quite frankly, there's some terrifying things happening in churches across the country. And I'm not talking about bad guys attacking churches. That is terrifying. But what's terrifying is a lackadaisical approach to church security. And the possible problems that can arise from that are terrifying to think about. And this is often why we have such a fight to get a church security plan into place in a church, because people inherently understand that the protection can become the danger. So there's a lot to look at here. We need to start with understanding what's at risk. So while, yes, obviously we think of a movie like Die Hard or something like that that's very violent and bad guys come in with machine guns and hold everybody hostage and everything. That absolutely can and does happen. It's also astoundingly rare. It's very, very rare to have something like that happen. Other things are far more common. So the chances of your congregation being attacked by somebody with a firearm are less. Those chances are less than you being struck by lightning. You're far more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to have an armed person come in and attack your sanctuary. So we need to make sure that we are actually prepared for what's likely to happen. So we need to look at what's vulnerable in our church, why is it vulnerable, and we need to mitigate that risk. Because that's what we're doing, is just mitigating risk. We cannot eliminate risk, we can only mitigate it. So first off, let's consider that your children at the church need to be protected. We have a lot of young children, youth, and youth groups and people that are working with them and doing things. You need to make sure 100% positive that every single one of those people has been cleared with a background check. Their past has been looked into, and it should be a pretty in-depth background check. It should not be something that's taken lightly. Everybody at the church who has anything to do with children needs to be investigated. What are your policies for parents picking up kids? That's a very important thing. Do you allow a child to be picked up by spouses? Can an aunt or a grandmother come and pick up a child? Oftentimes, a disgruntled spouse will come and pick up a child from school or from church, and then we'll find out that that was not a good thing. And also, we need to have zero tolerance in dealing with these items. Anything regarding with children, any kind of abuse that might happen with children, or any kind of policy deviations around the kids, there needs to be a zero tolerance plan in place for all of this. We cannot allow any lowering of the guard when it comes to children. We also should consider that security at the church really ought to be covert. Our security guards should not be well identifiable. The church should not know who is a security guard at the church and who is not. And I feel very, very strongly that they should not know who's armed and who's not armed. Unfortunately, average congregants have no training. They don't understand what's at risk. They have no knowledge of this. And they will volunteer armed people for things that armed people should have they should be nowhere around. They have these people that would volunteer you for something know nothing about what's at stake. So consider, do you have a very solid fire plan? Are you aware that arson is a very common thing, and arson can be used against the church? Often arson against churches is done when no one is there. But what if you were to have it happen on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night with the church full of congregants? Do you have plans for evacuation and how you handle a fire? Do you have medical plans? Do your people have medical training? These are things that you need to address because you're going to have a lot more medical incidents happen at your church than you're going to have violence incidents happen at your church. So I feel very strongly that security should be covert, and it ought to be administered much like a usher or deacon policy would be administered, where these guys are just there in their normal Sunday morning clothing. They have assigned responsibilities, and that needs to be taken very seriously. But they should not be readily identifiable as security people. This can help prevent the problem with security people creating problems with parishioners in the church, and help the church as a whole to feel more comfortable with them being there. So you really need, as we spoke in the beginning about what's vulnerable, why is it vulnerable, and how do we mitigate those risks, you really need a very in-depth threat assessment. I strongly recommend that you get guidance from somebody who can lead you through that threat assessment yourself. Now, I do SEPTED risk assessments, crime prevention through environmental design, and that is something that I would do separately. But any kind of a threat assessment, I'm going to incorporate the people who are involved in the church security into the threat assessment, and we'll work together on it as a group, because the people in the church know far more than any professional who's going to come in and evaluate the church from the outside. So give some serious thought when it comes time to do the threat assessment to decide what do we need to do to protect our church. Because that's why we do what we do. We do it because we have identified something that needs protecting. We don't just come in with guns and all this other stuff and ready to go, not knowing what the real risks are to us. So we have to have a threat assessment. That's one of the first things that we do to identify what our plan is going to be. So a group of people should work together, and at least half of those people should be from the church, who know the inner workings of the church, to identify what's vulnerable, what can be attacked here at the church. Do you have a group of children? Well, the children are at risk. They are vulnerable. Just because they're a target, put it that way. We need to identify what can be attacked. Then we need to look at why that thing is vulnerable, and then what can be done to eliminate that, or not eliminate, but reduce that risk, to mitigate that risk. So one of the things then, once that threat assessment has been done, and by the way, you're going to have to spend money to do this. If the church is not willing to put some money into this, and I don't mean many thousands of dollars unless you're a mega church, I'm just saying a small amount of money. If the church isn't willing to pay any money toward a threat assessment and developing mitigation procedures and purchasing medical equipment and paying for training for individuals on a security team or a safety team, you need to sit back and think long and hard about that. If the church as a whole is not willing to invest in their own safety, should you be offering yourself as a safety guardian of the church? Offering help to someone who doesn't want help rarely works out. That is almost always a recipe for disaster. If the church isn't willing to put a line item in their budget for church security, even if it's only $100 a year, $200 a year, if they're unwilling to do that, you may have a group on your hands that are unwilling to do anything for their own protection. And if that's the case, you are going to fight a painful and uphill battle if you're going to try to come in and offer protection for them. So think long and hard about this. There needs to be buy-in from the church. And the most obvious way you can ensure that the buy-in has happened is if the church is willing to put some kind of money towards this. Doesn't have to be large amounts of money, but they have to have a monetary commitment. So the threat assessment, when you do this, you're going to pay something. It's going to cost something, and it will be worthwhile. Now, once you have a workable understanding of what's vulnerable, why it's vulnerable, and what can be done to mitigate the risks. Now you need to start maintaining the plan, because the plan is the mitigation of the risks. Whatever you came up with to mitigate the risks, you need to maintenance that plan. There needs to be a review on a specific timeline. Once every 3 months, once every 6 months, once a year, there needs to be a review of the plan and see, are we doing what we said we would do? Because if you don't, then it's all for naught. You have to maintain the security plan, the mitigation plan. You have to maintain that. That's very important. One of the things that you'll need to do if you have some kind of a church security, a first action, a first response, some kind of a team that's going to actually step up at the moment something happens. If you have a team like that, you need to be collecting intelligence. Yep, gossip in the church. And this needs to be handled by someone who is a mature, spiritual, solid person, a solid Christian, if you would. They need to be very mature so that this doesn't become a gossip fest. But you need to know, one of the biggest risks that churches face is domestic violence exploding into the church, rolling over into the church. Stuff that happens at home causes stress and strife in the lives of in the family, and then a member of that family comes into the church, and then other parts of the family who aren't coming to the church for help and for comfort as that one came in response to the problem, they will come, or they may come, and they may then take it out on that other individual at the church. This is very, very common. Professionals at the church who offer counseling need to be very, very careful, because if a couple splits up, oftentimes the counseling gets blamed for the problem. And so it's very common to see one of the spouses arrive at the church to take it out on the counselor of the church. That's a serious thing. We need intelligence. We need to know when there's things happening in people's lives that can lead them to do unusual things for them. You know, I can't believe that Billy Bob would do such a thing. Well, did you know about all the stressors in his life at that time? So the church security team, the safety team, if they're kept abreast of, just be aware there's stuff happening in these people's lives, and there's a lot of stress there, and just be aware. Or specifically, their threats have been made by this individual, and so if this individual shows up at the church in the church parking lot, we need to deal with it there. And having a specific plan and how to do that is very, very important. So the specific plan and how to deal with that individual, we're looking at training. A church security team needs training. If there are firearms on the team, which isn't a given, every church security team should not have firearms. Some churches need firearms because of risks. Other churches don't have those risks, and carrying firearms is actually going to increase the danger in the congregation rather than decrease it. Yes, I said it. Because human beings are fallible. We make mistakes. And if there are guns in the sanctuary, there are possibilities, maybe very unlikely, maybe more likely, depending on the people who are carrying them. There are possibilities of tragedies occurring that don't have anything to do with a violent attack on the church. So not every church safety team needs firearms. Not everybody on the safety team needs firearms. That's a whole different thing that has to be evaluated. So training is very necessary. And if you have firearms on in the holsters on your church security team, those individuals need a lot of firearms training. They need a lot. That firearms training, the shooting, the practice, that training has to be done with standards. They need to meet certain standards. And if they don't, then they should not be carrying the firearm. And the standards have to be administered. I don't care if this is the nicest, most wonderful teddy bear. He's been here 100 years. He's a founding member of the church. I don't care who he is. He's got to meet standards or he shouldn't be carrying in the church. Another aspect of training, number one is firearms training. If their firearms are there, we need serious firearms training. And I would advocate for training classes happening once every 6 months, at a minimum once a year. Beyond that, I think approaches irresponsibility. The second item is legal aftermath training. The church security team members who carry firearms need to know what's going to happen after a shooting occurs. Very few people know this stuff. This isn't widely known. The gold standard for this is Mossad-e-Ayoub's Arms Citizens Rules of Engagement. That class, the MAG 40 includes 20 hours of shooting. The MAG 20 classroom is the gold standard. And this is Mossad-e-Ayoub, who's a legal expert extraordinaire. He's been involved in cases since I was 9 years old. He's been testifying in court on legal aspects of self-defense use. He goes deep into what you can expect and how you should comport yourself and what the standards are that you're going to be held to. So legal aftermath training is critical for the people who are going to be carrying in the church. Another aspect of this is legal training, not legal aftermath training, but actually what does the law say? And you should be able to get help with that from many people. There are a lot of people that can help with what the law says. As a starting point, I would recommend Andrew Branca and his book, The Law of Self-Defense. I would offer that as a starting point. And I think both the pastor and the security team members who carry firearms need to be involved in those two sets of training classes together, the legal aftermath training and the legal training, because the pastor needs to know what the law is in these regards. If you have a pastor who doesn't know what the law is and doesn't know what to expect in the legal aftermath, you're going to have problems. There will be misunderstandings developed there. The fourth thing that I think these individuals need, church safety team needs medical training. And I mean, absolutely CPR, first aid, without a doubt, those two things have to be there, but that's not enough. They need medical trauma training. I would say to a standard of tactical emergency casualty care or tactical combat casualty care. They need, Stop the Bleed is a part of that. So they need knowledge and expertise to save lives from massive hemorrhage and other things like this. This training, these points of training I've mentioned: firearms training to standards, legal aftermath training, legal training, and medical training. Everybody should go to this as a group. Everybody who's involved in this ought to be doing these classes as a group. That will help each other, help each team member understand each other and know what they know, which is very important. And they'll also know their levels of skill in regards to this stuff. So that's my recommendation on training. I think that a church having armed guards but not having an AED has completely missed the boat. Because as we said, it's like getting struck by lightning that you would have somebody come in and have a violent incident happen inside the church. But it's going to happen far more often that you will have somebody have a heart attack in the church. So medical training is critical, and I think that you should have AEDs, an AED in your church. You should have proper fire extinguisher training for the team safety members. That's a very easy thing to get, fire extinguisher training. You should have a plan for evacuation, and the safety team members should all have responsibilities in the event that the fire evacuation plan has been put into place. There should be lockdown procedures for children's church or the nursery, and a safety team member should be able to go there and know exactly what's expected of him to prevent people from taking children who really shouldn't have those children in their custody. Not necessarily to protect the kids from a machine gun wielding bad guy. Another item that needs to be carefully looked at is insurance. The church's insurance policy needs to be reviewed. You need to know exactly where the church insurance, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, what they allow, what they don't allow. That is very important. Then, of equal importance is that each member on the church safety team has personal self-defense coverage. So there are some insurance policies, and there are other types of, like, there's prepaid legal plans, and the one that I would prefer is a membership benefit organization like the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. They provide member benefits to you in the event you're involved in a violent confrontation. If you don't have that, you're going to be hung out to the wind. You see, you're going to need to have an attorney working instantly on this thing if you have to use force, because you don't get any special considerations because you're on a church safety or security team. You're just a citizen who has killed another citizen. That's what the law sees when they roll up. And I don't care that you're a hero and all, the law doesn't see it that way. They see that you killed another citizen. So you need an attorney working on this like the next day. You need to have an expert witness recreating what happened and producing a report in a few days afterwards. That's going to take a lot of money, cash on the barrelhead. While you're sitting in jail, this stuff needs to be happening. You need to have somebody helping you out with bail. So it is entirely possible that you will need $10,000 a couple of days after the event happened. You might need $10,000 the night of the event to get out of jail. So it is entirely possible that this could, if this turns into a high-profile situation and the DA doesn't believe self-defense exists, that is a thing, you may need $50,000 up front. Well, a lot of us cannot write a check for $50,000. So having a plan, something like USCCA, Firearms Legal Protection, Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, something along this line, having a plan that will help you meet these needs after an event is critical, because no one can help you after you've been involved in a violent self-defense incident except your attorney and the expert witness that he has come to. You can't talk to anybody about this. That stuff is admissible in court, and it's going to get used against you. The fact of the matter is that you're on your own. And that's a serious thing to consider when you consider strapping on a firearm and coming into a church and working as a member of a church safety team. You are taking an enormous risk. If you're involved in a self-defense incident in the church and somebody dies and you're prosecuted, the prosecution, your defense may cost you $200,000. It may cost you $500,000. This, and your freedom for the rest of your life may be on the line. You can expect that you will have massive problems in your marriage. You may lose your spouse. Many people who have been involved in these kinds of incidents have ended up divorced. This is serious things that need to be considered. So you need to know what the risks are, and you need to have mitigated your own risks, just like you do in the church beforehand. So the church, you need to verify the church's insurance and what it will and won't cover, and what can and can't be done. And then you need, as a church security team member, you need self-defense coverage of some kind. The sad fact of the matter is once this is over, you're on your own. You will be amazed, but you are on your own. It's highly unlikely the church is going to rally around you after you've done something, used force, and somebody died from it. And even if they do rally around you, there's not much they can really do. The people that can help you are your attorney and your expert witness. So, because this is such a serious thing, you need the buy-in of the whole church. And we addressed that earlier when we talked about a financial component. If the church is not on board with every step of the way of this, you can expect to have massive problems. And if there's problems in the administration of this, and we're not actually maintaining our risk mitigation plans, then the whole thing is falling apart and it's not going to work well. And you're putting yourself in a position where if you don't have buy-in of the church, perhaps you could be all alone and cut off if something happened and you stepped up and protected the church. So these are very serious things. This is just an overview of some of the stuff that needs to be addressed in this. I'd be very happy to speak with anybody at a later date about this stuff and in depth. I have some resources that I could recommend. I greatly appreciate your time on this. Thank you very much. We'll see you later.